So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today. I'm Adam Scarzafava, AVP for Marketing and Communications here at Edge. And I'm really excited to welcome you to this session focused on improving cybersecurity performance while meeting JIF insurance requirements. We know cyber insurance and the role of the JIFs is becoming more and more crucial to the ways that your towns and your school districts work. And so, definitely a topic worth running down here today. Right at the top, though, I want to set the tone a little bit for who Edge is and why we're bringing folks together to discuss this topic in the first place. So Edge is a nonprofit member-based research and education network and technology consortium based here in the state of New Jersey, based in Newark, New Jersey. And we were formed by the New Jersey President's Council for Higher Education back around the turn of the century. I think the higher education presidents got together and very wisely realized that the internet wasn't going anywhere and they needed to build themselves a consortium, build themselves a support framework to really succeed in that world. And so Edge was initially formed by the higher ed institutions to do just that. In the 20 plus years since, our mission has really, really grown beyond just the bounds of higher education. So we do still, work with, almost 100% of the higher education institutions in New Jersey and support them in their use of technology. But we've also grown to do much more in support of K-12 districts, in support of state and local governments, libraries, healthcare, other nonprofit institutions. So really anybody with a public serving mission, Edge now exists to serve them in the effective use of technology. And just a bit about a few ways that we do that. The heritage of Edge being the network that we own and operate, which is EdgeNet. EdgeNet runs around the state of New Jersey and actually has points of presence in New York, Pennsylvania, down in Virginia now, so growing regionally. And the network serves 99% of higher education institutions and a growing number of K-12 districts and municipalities as well. So in that space, we really provide support above and beyond what a traditional ISP would do. So we look at ourselves as an NSP, a network service provider that really brings in some added value and benefits, including cybersecurity on the network side. Edge Discovery is a part of that in higher ed. We really support the research and discovery missions of those institutions. Edge Market is really important and a growing segment of what we do in helping institutions, districts, municipalities to make smart decisions about procurement and do that under competitively bid contracts that Edge aggregates as a cooperative pricing system. So we're able to drive discounts and bring together some really strategic procurements in ways that other co-ops and other contracts don't. We do events, networking, and community building, just like what we're here doing today. And then as a consortium, we're also a thought leader and a solution development and solution provider. So we help our consortium members accelerate digital transformation in their organizations. We help with cloud strategy and migration planning and how do you effectively, safely, securely use the cloud. Digital teaching and learning is becoming more and more important, obviously was critical during the pandemic and is still a key feature of the mission in higher ed and becoming more important in K-12 as well. And then cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance, which in the last few years has gotten so much more complex and so much more sort of critical to the missions of the organizations that we work with. And so we work to provide guidance, provide assessments, provide all the support services that the organizations in our consortium need, and helping to lead that effort for us is our lead Virtual Chief Information Security Officer, Dr. Dawn Dunkerley. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and kick it over to Dawn to jump into the meat of today's session.
Thank you very much. I will just jump in and off we go. So pleasure to meet you all. I think we have a lot of new faces in the organization or that maybe I haven't met before. So welcome to our webinar. Just so you know, I like to preface everything, one of these webinars with this. I can't see the chat when I have the full screen going. So again, Adam will be monitoring all of that and just letting me know. So feel free to stop me, Adam, if something comes up and you need me to stop and address something. So a little bit of background on me for those of you who might not have been into one of these sessions before. My name is Dr. Dawn Dunkerley. I am the Principal Chief Information Security Officer of EDGE. My background a little bit, 15 years supporting the US government, primarily the US Army. My last assignment before I left the Army community was as the Chief of Cyber for an organization that had approximately 125,000 soldiers, civilians, and contractors under my purview. So, you know, I like to bring my background of cybersecurity, cyber intelligence out of the intelligence community that I was a part of for many years. Like to bring those resources and that same level of rigor and effort to the community that we've been working with. Primarily, we talked about doing a lot of education work, but we're seeing a lot of movement within this municipal space and trying to help you understand your requirements, help you understand how you can be both effective and efficient with your cybersecurity. So that's why we're here today. So I like to start off with a little bit of a level set. And if anybody's on the webinar that might have been to one of our previous ones, you might see some of the content that we talked about previously. And that's because, again, we want to make sure everybody's kind of on the same page about what are we up against. So ransomware is not the only threat. We have other things that we have to worry about as cybersecurity professionals, but ransomware really is driving a lot of the changes that are happening to our insurance requirements, which is one of the things we're here for today. So ransomware obviously is a type of malware that was predominantly designed to encrypt files on a device, allowing the malicious actors to collect a ransom if they are able to do so. You see here the number of ransomware attacks going up quite sharply from 2020 just into 21. You're going to see a lot of 2020, 2021 statistics and anecdotes here, just because, quite frankly, the 2022 numbers right now are wildly all over the place. Just to be very frank with you, some people are saying we're seeing more attacks. Some people say we're seeing less attacks. So the jury is still out very much on what 2022 actually looked like. We also have a problem that not everyone reports. So we actually don't have a good understanding of how many people were truly attacked. One thing that we are seeing as a trend, though, is that while ransomware is still very much alive and active, the threat actors have gotten smart to the fact that people are taking their security more seriously, taking their backup strategies, taking their incident response planning, things we're going to talk about in the end, taking it much more seriously. And so they've moved from getting their money through ransom much more towards breaching your data ahead of time when you don't even know that they're there, and then basically holding your data for ransom. So we'll talk about that actually in the next slide. What does that mean? So the deep web and the dark web. So we'll start by talking about the surface web, and that's the internet that you know and love, primarily the World Wide Web, as it were. So that's your you go to Google, you're typing stuff in, you're going to your favorite websites, you're just browsing around. That's your surface web, and that's anything that's meant to be searchable. So by your search engines, essentially, to be simplistic about it, anything that Google can touch ends up being the surface web. So you see all the sites there. That's where we spend the bulk of our time. But then you end up with deep web. You see their academic databases, your medical databases. Those are all stored, on the internet, but they're stored in what should be secured, hopefully access controlled parts of the web. So that's your deep web. That's not supposed to be searchable. Now, sometimes we do end up hearing about organizations that, Google happened to index, a database and it ended up being searchable. That does happen. But it shouldn't. Ideally, that information should be, again, secured in such a way that it's accessible to the right people, but not to the wrong people. Finally, the dark web. So the dark web is essentially a subset of the deep web that is primarily used or accessed through what we call the onion router. So Tor, if you've ever heard of it. which uses a series of hot points to basically tunnel the your traffic to an anonymous to you point where it comes out, working very much as an anonymizer for the activities going on. And so that's really where we monitor for threat actors putting that information out for sale. And actually, we'll talk about that in the next slide. So all sorts of things available on the dark web. As you see there, everything from people to credit card numbers. So these credit card, basically theft firms that steal bulk credit card numbers, they'll post them out for sale on the dark web. Obviously, pirated media content, but your data from your organization, from your borough or township or town or city can end up out there as well. The threat actors actually have gotten very clever about this. In a way, they want people to be aware and afraid of their information being posted out online. So what they've done is they've actually created quite explicit, quite public presences for themselves. They have websites stood up on the dark web for the major threat kind of ransomware organizations, threat actors, and they will, after they have exploited an organization, generally what happens is they will contact the organization, usually through a ransom note or something like that, give them a certain amount of time to come up with the money, generally in Bitcoin, that they want from you. And if you don't respond in the way that they're looking for, then they start threatening and then subsequently often posting information out on their site that we talked about. One thing to note here is, and it's very important, even if you did pay the ransom, that has no bearing on whether they will or will not actually put the information out on the dark web. People in the past used to pay the ransom actors for tools to decrypt the file shares or systems or servers that had been encrypted. That is by far not a known thing that they will do. They might say they will, but in fact, the decryptors often don't work or don't decrypt everything. And then, of course, the data breach is an entirely separate matter of, do you pay them again to not breach your data? And they absolutely still might do it. So, we monitor, we being the Edge security, cybersecurity team, we monitor the dark web to see who, quite frankly, who's been exploited, make sure that we don't see anybody we know, but also to kind of take a look at the trends and what are we seeing within the, these threat actors kind of activities and what do we think is going to happen in the future. So kind of moving to that, some statistics and talk about a little bit of an incident history for government and ransomware specifically. So again, starting to see some things bubbling out of 2022, but 60% of state and local organizations were targeted by ransomware attacks in 2021. I would say that's actually higher than this particular report would suggest. Everyone is scanned. So arguably, you're being scanned daily by any number of people or organizations looking to see, knocking on the door to see if there's a vulnerability that might be exploited. So everybody is, kind of being looked at. The actual active targeting number, I think that's still low because, as I said previously, not everybody reports that something has happened. In fact, if the insurance company doesn't have to get involved and something can be handled in-house, people tend to not report that to outside organizations. We'll talk about what kind of support organizations we have available for you in a further slide, but we do get some good data out of some of our national sources such as FBI. But again, unless they know about it, they can't kind of roll that up into their annual numbers. So I think 60% is actually a little low, but it's still a significant number nonetheless. 75% of attacks resulted in data being encrypted. So again, while the encryption piece might not be as worthwhile as it once was, it's still is one of the critical pieces of ransomware. So they're going to still try it to see if they can get the money out of you, even if you don't end up paying for it. 20% of attacks were successfully stopped, so that's good. Maybe somebody had their ducks in a row and were able to actually identify something happening and stop it before maybe the actual encryption process started taking place. And then 30% paid the ransom. So that number, again, 30%, that is dropping significantly. And so again, we're moving more towards the data breach side of things. The average ransom payment reported, and I put reported there in parentheses because we again only know what is reported up, and kind of we have that high level roll up, but 213,000 of essentially Bitcoin, at that given point in time. Again, they usually operate in Bitcoin. I do want to we'll talk about the backups. I actually want to jump down to the bottom bullet there. The average downtime and recovery costs were approximately 1.5 million. I see this number fluctuating in different reporting. I think 1.5 million is fair. And I really want to jump on this one, not including the ransom payment itself. So you pay that 213,000 roughly equivalent in Bitcoin. And then your 1.5 million. Well, what does that end up being? That is the cost of being down for, sometimes days, weeks, down for months. We'll talk about Atlanta here in a second as a worst case scenario. The cost of overtime, the cost of new equipment, the cost of bringing in additional support. You can even get into in a truly catastrophic event, which does happen, the cost of standing up a call center to take in calls from affected individuals, or the cost of mailing notification letters to affected individuals. So there's a lot of cost that is above and beyond that ransom payment to get you back up and running. But the good news, we'll talk about the ways to get ahead of that, backups, kind of touching on that last one there. The 60% of government entities with ransomware had backups available. So backups being one of the most critical controls that we can have in place, making sure that we lose a minimal amount of information, making sure that our backups don't get encrypted also. So we have to take care of those, because actually that's one of the first things they're going to go looking for, is see if they can lock up your backups also. They don't want you to be able to roll to a backup. So how do we make sure that you are able to? Actual incidents themselves, again, this is kind of a difficult thing to nail down because not everything is reported. But between 2018 and 2020, so only a 2-year span, we saw roughly $52.88 billion. So that's government writ large in the U.S. So that's from the federal all the way down to the local government level. But I will tell you, the federal government doesn't tend to have a lot of really catastrophic ransomware events because they have the budget and the people. I know I used to work there, so I remember having that budget. But the ability to put things into place to prevent those attacks from actually executing for the threat actor, we don't actually have that level of resource and personnel available for us at the local level. So you do see threat actors actively targeting the local level to try to take advantage of that kind of scarcity that we have in place. 2022, they're saying so more than 200 organizations across those sectors were compromised by ransomware in the U.S. alone. But I did want to talk about probably the biggest incident that really kickstarted a lot of people thinking about what could happen with a compromise of critical information associated with ransomware in the city of Atlanta. So you may have noticed by my accent that I'm actually from Alabama. So Atlanta is a neighbor of ours, very close by. My favorite airport to fly through. We can chat about that afterwards. But speaking of the airport, even the airport systems had to be taken offline. If you're at all familiar with flying through Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta, it's a huge airport. In most measures, it is the busiest airport in the world in any given year. They had to take the airport systems down. The Wi-Fi, for sure, for some length of time, to kind of keep the spread of the ransomware from moving to the actual airport systems. They had to take the Wi-Fi down in the Atlanta airport down for some time, but key municipal functions, we're talking water, we're talking power, sewer, gas, all those things. We had to really look at what systems were critical, getting those up first, and then they were partially down for 3 months. So things that weren't prioritized because we were looking at getting things like water and power back up in a organized and prioritized fashion, they still had things that were partially down for months after. I do want to highlight also, and this is a more education focused one, but you may have heard kind of late last year, the Los Angeles Unified School District had a massive ransomware attack, one of the largest school districts in the country. And why I wanted to mention that particular one is they were down, they got back up and running, but even when you're back up and running, the analysis and the forensics associated with how far into the system and network did the threat actor get to, what did they touch, what could they possibly come back and try to penetrate in the future. The school district actually came out in the last few weeks and said, hey, indications are looking like they were in the network much longer than we thought they were initially. So we're talking, ransomware actors hanging out in the network sometimes for months, breaching your data, sending it out of the network, getting ready for the time that they want to conduct that actual, execution of the ransomware code. So we'll come back to insurance. So why is insurance driving a lot of the conversation at this point? I will touch on a couple of these. Difficult to diversify. So a lot of insurance providers are very heavily invested in certain industries. Education is a great example of that, where we have a handful of insurance carriers that are doing the bulk of the coverage for the kind of the education vertical. And when a threat actor or multiple threat actors are heavily targeting that particular segment, it really does make it difficult for them to spread their risk around because everybody's really getting targeted. The big one here that I want to touch on, though, is that second point. Cyber threats are constantly evolving. Ransomware wasn't really a thing 10 years ago. It was more kind of, poor user behaviors or traditional hackers, as it were. But now ransomware is a big deal, and a lot of the controls that we're going to talk about are going to be as a direct result of the ransomware threat. But they're trying to stay on top of that, evolve with that. But then what will the major threat be 5 years from now? So insurance companies have not historically been known to be cyber experts. And so they are trying to stay on top of this by bringing in third parties, bringing in specialized tools to try to get away from just doing questionnaires to a little bit more trust but verify. And then finally, long incident timeframes, talking again about the LA Unified School District. When an attack happens on March 1st, but you find out they'd been in the network since October, what happens if you changed insurance in the interim? Will that cover that event? And then some policies limit the time frame of coverage. So if it wasn't found for a series of months, it's found, it's executed. What does that even look like for you? Will you even have coverage for that? So lots of questions that are evolving around insurance. And I mentioned the lack thereof. We are seeing some of our education clients, for sure, if they're not able to meet the bare minimum requirement of that the insurance company is putting forward, they are actually losing their coverage. So we're starting to see, that they can't get a new company to take them on, and they can't get renewed either. So it's a very scary situation indeed. Just want to touch quickly on this because we were talking a little bit about what the applications are starting to look like, and the JIF is a great example of this. We are fortunate enough, again, to work with a lot of different clients, a lot of different insurance companies. So we kind of try annually to do an analysis of what are the new questionnaires that are coming out. What do they look like? How are they evolving? And the JIF is doing the same thing. The requirements are evolving. Some things maybe that were nice to do in the past are must-dos now. Are moving up definitely in the kind of the hierarchy of requirement, as we're going to talk about in a second. So this really gets back to my previous point about they're moving much more towards a trust but verify, where you fill out the questionnaire, you say, yes, we've done these things, we're good, but we're going to have to be able to show that these things are actually being done, and being done to the stringency that is required. So get into the actual CyberJIF program. This is a really interesting program, and it is evolving, by the way. We've actually seen some updated guidance that's gone out in the last few months for 2023 that's kind of changing and shaking things up a little bit. But it's at its heart, it is a bit of a maturity model. So the level 1 basic maturity, missing certain controls, we'll talk about those in a second, but they're really capping your limit and making you pay more for in the event of a crisis. Your upgraded controls, again, you have the critical things in place, maybe not all of the things in place, but the critical things in place. You see that limit goes up sharply. So they're willing to, with a work and effort and kind of contribution that you will make, they will go up in that limit quite significantly. And then level 3, of course, is all the recommended controls in place, and you see that retention number drop down as well. So really, at the end of the day, you making an investment in your cybersecurity is going to make a big difference in kind of your coverage and what ends up happening in the time of a crisis. So what do those controls look like? And that's really where we're going to spend kind of the rest of our time. Before we begin talking about the actual controls and what measures we're going to put in place, I actually took this directly out of the actual MEL JIF documentation, which I thought was really interesting. Number 1, get a technology expert, and that's in their all caps, not in mine. I think we, writ large, have relied very much on, well, again, this is a questionnaire. I can fill this out. It's fine. I sort of know what's going on in my local area. So when I say in the future, it's going to very much be a trust but verify. I have in the last few weeks even seen some schools that did not fill their paperwork out appropriately. Insurance plan, our insurance questionnaire was filled out without the actual IT staff, without the technology experts being involved. It was filled out, it was sent in, and the provider came back and said, hey, this isn't right. This is not indicative of your actual cybersecurity posture. This is not accurate. So we're not even sure that they're going to get the insurance because, quite frankly, they didn't have the experts involved. They filled it out. Someone in the food chain filled it out without getting the proper answers, and the whole thing may have been for naught at this point in time, which is very scary. So the first thing there, get a technology expert. If you've got folks in-house that know the posture of your organization, that know what needs to be done, that's awesome. If they're familiar with JIF, even better. If not, certainly we at Edge, we have the ability to help you with that, through a variety of different services that we offer, but we do have that ability to assist. Review the cyber risk management program with your technology expert. So the the MEL has actually been pretty clear about what they expect. So I want to make a point here that cybersecurity is not just a technology expert, not just their problem. It's actually a leadership issue. So making sure the leadership understands that that this is going to take people, processes, and technology to get this fully up and running. And the people part ends up being your users. It ends up being your leadership. It's not just your IT staff. So everybody needs to understand. Everybody needs to review the plan to see what we're going to do. Developing that plan. How long is it going to take to get it there, and how much is it going to cost to implement the standards? The good news is that a lot of the basic ones are things that we should have already been thinking about, should have already been doing for the most part. Levels 2 and 3 obviously bring more stringency and thus more time and budget. But we're going to develop a plan. We're going to put it out there and say, this is how long we're going to take. Here's the work plan for that, and we go after it. Once you have that implemented, they do have a certification checklist that you actually go through and say, yes, I'm doing this. Yes, I'm doing this. This is where I go back to make sure you have it done before you say you have it done. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a big problem if you didn't. And then finally, we're going to annually review our risks, see how we're doing them, and see, quite frankly, if there are any updates to the insurance requirements that we need to add in to make sure that we are meeting the requirements for the program. Okay, so I'm just going to jump in, and we're going to talk primarily about the level 1 requirements. I do have a couple of extra ones sprinkled in here, and I'll tell you why. Asset inventory and management. Do we know what is on our network? What's on our systems? Do we know everything that's sitting on our network belongs to us and is managed by us? Now there are BYOD organizations, and I truly understand that, but we need to think about what risks do those bring to our systems and our networks, and how can we segment those, or some other way to manage that risk and mitigate it as much as possible. Asset inventory is actually, I think at this point in time, a level 2 requirement, but I mention it as a level 1 because it's almost impossible to do some of the other ones that we have listed here to the best of our ability without actually knowing what hardware and software we have on our networks. I really do believe strongly in understanding what inventory we have and managing that. So making sure that new things aren't added without proper permissions, making sure that we understand the risk of new software and hardware that might be put on the network, having a process for that. So asset inventory and management. Patch and update management. If you are at all involved in IT, Microsoft has their Patch Tuesday. A lot of other companies have their regular patch cycles. Apple seems to patch whenever they get around to it, out of the middle of nowhere. But we have to stay up to date with keeping those patches and updates to software. We have to prioritize when they are going to be put on critical systems. And we have to make sure that we're doing those as expeditiously as possible. Just plain old people scanning, looking to see who's vulnerable. Anything, especially that's sitting out accessible on the greater internet that's not patched. Some estimates say that an unpatched Windows system put on the internet is already being attacked within 15 minutes. So making sure that we have our systems patched and updated as quickly as possible will help drive that level of vulnerability down. User and access management. This covers a variety of things, everything from, quite frankly, when a new user comes into your organization, what permissions are they given? What access are they given to critical systems, critical files that they may need to have access to do their job, but not anymore. We don't want everyone. It's imperative that not everyone has access to everything. We need to have access to the things that we need to do our jobs and nothing more. Furthermore, I have kind of there the password to MFA, multi-factor authentication. So at the level 1, You have to meet the insurance requirements for strong passwords. They have a couple of different options there in the documentation about what that entails. But I would highly encourage you, highly encourage you to go ahead and start planning towards multi-factor authentication. It's definitely moved up in the kind of level of maturity that they're requiring it at. I believe it's now at a level 2. It is possibly the singularly most important thing that you can do for user access management, making sure that, again, passwords can be broken. The strongest passwords take a long time, but they can still be broken. Multi-factor authentication just puts you a real benefit to your kind of security and your user and access management. Defensive software, making sure that you have endpoint detection and response. We used to talk about antivirus. There's still antivirus out there that is running and it scans your system for malware. The kind of the next level up and what the insurance requirements are really leaning towards is that true endpoint detection and response. So what does that mean? Antivirus historically will scan your system, sometimes on a set schedule. Sometimes it'll do it automatically when something new is put into the system, or you put a new CD. Do we even do CDs anymore? But the things that are, I'm trying to think if I even have a system that has a CD drive anymore. But thumb drives and different ways that software, different downloads. Endpoint detection and response actually takes that a step further. So it is looking for known bad. Ransomware software is a great example. A lot of ransomware groups use kind of things like screen sharing software, TeamViewer, or Screen Connect in order to gain access to different systems. Endpoint detection and response is looking for the indications and warnings that are being fed to them by kind of threat intelligence to say, I'm going to look at all your endpoints to see if I see indications and warnings of these threat actors, and it can actually kind of segment that system off if it's found on a system, and really give you a leg up and keep that software from moving throughout the network. So it really is that next level up from the endpoint detection and response to a much more active defensive posture. User training and awareness. We all know about training. Everybody has to do training on everything from workforce kind of safety and the way that we're going to act within the workforce. We need to have that same level of training and awareness for cybersecurity. So at least annually, all users need to be trained on phishing, ransomware, good behaviors, how to report. So we need to make sure that we have those things in place as well. And we need to keep up with who has actually done the training and awareness activities so that we can say, here's who hasn't done them. It needs to become ingrained into our culture in the same way that other trainings have been. Email warnings. So if you've ever gotten an email, you may have it in place within your organization right now, but if you've ever gotten an email from an outside party and it says external sender or something like that, and it warns you that this email did not come from inside of our organization, you will have then experienced what we're talking about here. So this email banners that warn when things are coming from outside of the organization are actually really important. I have just this week alone, it's only Wednesday, but I have had multiple schools that have reached out and said, hey, we're having a real problem right now with spoofed emails coming. They say they're coming from the university, but they're not. They're actually, they look like they are, but they're coming from a Gmail address. They're targeting students, they're targeting, people looking for jobs. And that training people, again, gets back to the training, but training people to look at those email warnings and say, oh, well, this says it's coming from Joe, but it says it's from outside of the organization. Maybe I don't need to click on that, or maybe I need to call Joe up and ask him if he, sent this to me. By the way, as an aside, don't ever respond back to one of those emails. if somebody sends you a spoofed email, don't respond back to them. Forward it on to your IT staff or whatever the kind of process has been put into place for that, because they will engage with you and talk to you. The threat actors, they will carry on a conversation with you by email. Policies and procedures. So we talked a little bit about that. The big one for the purposes of the JIF is the technology policy, which is kind of an overarching policy that includes your password policy, as well as a number of other things. So that's their kind of overarching document to have in place, is that technology policy. But there are certainly a lot of other policies, acceptable use, that we want to make sure people understand what is required of them before they join the organization. Onboarding and offboarding policies, when people join the organization, when people leave the organization, what are the kind of the procedures that we have in place there. And then finally, government cyber memberships. So I talked earlier about different support organizations that can help. And the JIF actually does specify two very good ones that if you're not members of already, this is a no cost thing that can be done today. Joining the NJ KIC, which is NJCCIC. I always mess up the acronym, so I'm not even gonna, the Cybersecurity and Communication Cell for, basically they are the New Jersey liaison to the FBI, as well as just keeping an overall look at the kind of the health and welfare of cybersecurity within New Jersey. Great group. I've worked with them on a number of things, and they're super helpful. And again, available to us. You know, the threat information, the support, it's free, and it's good stuff. The other one that they mentioned is called the Multi-State ISAC, Information Sharing and Analysis Community, I believe is what ISAC stands for. There are a number, dozens of ISACs across the world for different kind of different industries, different organizations. So there's a wastewater ISAC, there's an oil and gas ISAC, there's an energy ISAC, there's all sorts of things. There's one for the defense industrial base, just for government contractors, for example. But we fall under the multi-state ISAC, which is the local government, public schools are available for this as well. And what the multi-state ISAC does, another level of threat intelligence, another level of people kind of watching out for you, passing information. But they also do some things like, you know, some monitoring. If you give them your IP ranges, they can monitor your IP ranges for potential malicious activities. Again, lots of stuff that goes on with that, really great and available to you for free. They're actually partnered with Homeland Security. And so I have had a lot of experience dealing with them in a time of crisis, and they've been, just like the NJ KIC, great organization.
And we'll be able to share some information, links to you know, where you can look for that kind of stuff and follow up to too. So we'll pull that all together for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those are the two big ones that are actually explicitly mentioned in the JIF, as you need for the level 1, you need to join these organizations. It's a win-win. Again, it can be done today and at no cost. So those kind of getting ahead of the requirements, are getting ahead of the attack, the things to mitigate the severity of an attack. Data backups, we talked about it earlier. You know, number one foe of a ransomware actor is having a robust data backup, and having a backup. The JIF actually specifies exactly what they want from you, which is nice. They're not vague and just say have a data backup. They actually say this is what we expect for you to have in place, which is very good to know where you stand. That's going to help get you back up and running. Again, as I mentioned previously, super key is to have the backups where they can't be affected by the ransomware actor either. So just keep that in mind. We're looking for something called an immutable backup. Trying to make that backup known, good, and trustworthy. Incident response planning. So again, we want to build that plan. We want to test that plan. That's another thing that we're very keen on doing, is making sure that we test plans ahead of time. So everyone involved, from quite frankly, the mayor, any anybody in the leadership chain, legal counsel, who's going to communicate to potentially affected residents or employees, down to our IT staff. Everybody has an explicit role within this process. It is not, again, it is not just an IT or technology function. There's a lot of this that's going to be, at the end of the day, if we have a major incident, it's not the IT people who generally end up on the front page of the newspaper. So everybody has a role, and we need to test that planning, have it squared away ahead of time. Even if the plan ends up being, step one, identify if we have a problem, step two, call the insurance company, which sometimes does end up being what it is. But we need to think about that ahead of time so that we can be, again, effective and efficient in our response. Risk management and communication. So this is just, quite frankly, understanding what risk we have, managing those risks up and down the leadership chain, so everyone knows kind of where we stand. These are the problems I'm having. Here's what I need your support with. That communication is so key, again, because cybersecurity is not just an IT problem, it's a leader issue. And finally, we get to risk transference, which is, in this case, insurance. So again, the better that we prepare, the better we have our our risk posture sorted out ahead of time, the more coverage and the more that the insurance company can do for us expediently. So bringing them in as a partner, but very clearly not as the only thing that we're doing. We can't just say, hey, I've got insurance, I'm good. They're very, very clearly trying to force people to move away from that and into a much more active posture of getting ready for an event and then calling the insurance company only when needed. So that really is a lot, but at the end of the day, those are the really critical things that we have to sort of get ahead of. Some things are low cost, no cost. Some things might take some time and budget to get ahead of. But now is the time to start thinking these things through and try to build that plan with your technology expert and get out ahead of it. So with that, pending any questions, that's what I have for today.
Awesome. Thanks, Dawn. And we did have a few questions come in, and I'm sure there are a handful more floating out there. So please feel free to continue to send questions through as we answer a few of these. We sort of ended there on, once an incident takes place, sort of mitigating how severe it gets. We had a question around recovery. So how do you deal with recovery, and could the ransomware actors still be in your system after you restore systems, and how do you make sure that doesn't happen?
Absolutely. So they definitely can. I have seen it happen, or I definitely have seen it happen where they just came right back after we locked them out of the system. So really, and this gets back to kind of what I was saying with the LA Unified School District. It ends up being very much a factor of the incident response and digital forensics teams will end up having to do that level of forensic analysis to say, hey, where did they come in from originally? Let's see if we can analyze to see where they came in from. And then can we tell how they moved laterally to spread across the network? And what are their indicators of compromise? So different threat actors tend to use different pieces of software. They have different tactics. So that's where that team really does come in and identify generally for us, how, to the best of our ability, how did they get in? How did they move across the network? And then you basically have to take those pieces of information and make sure that you have, blocked them out as best you can. My last situation where I had to deal with this, they had gotten in through a compromised Microsoft Exchange server. Exchange is just a thorn in my side right now. The last 3, I believe, incidents that I've had have been all compromised Exchange servers. And this particular situation, they were not able to get the Exchange server moved to Office 365, which they were working to do, moving it to 365. They were not able to get it done before the threat actor came right back. So they were able to get right back in through the same situation. The good news is we were waiting on them at that point in time. So that's the long and short is it takes sometimes months of forensics to figure out kind of where do they get in and where do they move.
Yeah. And you mentioned Microsoft there, and obviously a huge third-party vendor for lots of folks, but we had a question come in around the JIF requirements for third-party vendors. So what requirements, I guess, are you aware of? And then this might be an opportunity to talk a little bit too about the risks represented by those third-party vendors and how we sort of recommend mitigating some of those.
Absolutely. So the JIF requirements for third-party vendors, and I believe this is just for insurance writ large, are evolving for sure. From just move everything to the cloud and they'll take the risk on from that, much more to you can move your data, you can move your services to the cloud, but my cat has entered the chat. You can move your things to the cloud, but ultimately you still have responsibility for the security of that data. Again, if something's breached and it's in the cloud, it is still considered your responsibility, and it's probably going to be someone from your organization that ends up on the front page of the newspaper. Whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, that's sort of how it goes. So we do a kind of a bit of we take a really active approach at Edge on dealing with third-party vendors. So we use a series of tools and questionnaires ourselves to vet third-party vendors. Everything from having them fill out the questionnaire that talks about how do you store our data, how do you process our data, all those things, to the verify part where we're running our own vulnerability scans. We're actually taking a look at their perimeter. How are they doing their security? And really, going toe to toe with them and saying, hey, we're not going to make the choice to use you because your security posture does not meet our requirements. So we have, for the schools we work with currently in the boroughs and townships, we have a really robust third-party risk and vendor management program. And that's very much the way that all insurance, to include the JIF, is moving towards.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. A question here around just how do you strategically develop effective disaster recovery and incident response plans? And I know we do this, with and for lots of our consortium members, so you have a ton of experience there. So what are the recommendations for how you get off the ground with effective DR and IRP plans?
Absolutely. So starting with incident response planning, understanding ransomware is just one type of incident. There are lots of types of incidents, from a faculty member that's disgruntled or a staff member who gets access to something. We kind of see it across the board. So how we strategically look at this is it's less about the type of attack and it's more about the type of data that's affected. So and we lay out basically, for all intents and purposes, a flow chart associated with those different types of data. So if it's an incident that affects kind of public data, like let's think about like a website defacement. For example, it's embarrassing, it stinks, but if it doesn't affect anything but the public facing website, it's probably not something that you would call your insurance company about. Your real issues end up being confidential information. So things that maybe, it's in government, it's a little bit different because budget numbers often are public, but things like, performance plans, information about someone's termination, personally identifiable information, credit card information, payroll information, all these things that we have to gather and store, that really ratchets up your level of exposure. So at that point in time, your flow would take you to, okay, have we determined it's this type of incident? Okay, we have. Now this is, might be the time where we break glass and call the insurance company in. What information do we need to have ready for them? When they do that, who are the right people having the meeting to talk to the insurance company? Do we have legal counsel? Do we have a communications plan? All of those things. So again, it really at the kind of the higher level, it really revolves around what kind of data is affected, and how do we what do we need to do to actively get after that. DRP is much more complex because it often involves, through the nature of it, working with lots of different parts of the organization, like public safety, security, the police department. Are we moving from one building to another? Have we identified a disaster recovery site? Do we have the ability to do a hot site that we can stand up immediately? Do we have a warm site? Do we want a cold site? There's lots of things that are involved in disaster recovery planning. It's much more lengthy, kind of planned, pulled together with a lot more people involved, but very important, especially if you live in a place like me that has a lot of natural disasters that whip through here on a regular basis. So we're glad to talk to you in more depth about either one of those. We do a lot of both of those types of development.
Great, thanks. Had a kind of more basic question. You touched on the NJ KIC a little bit, but how are we working with the NJ KIC and with organizations like MEL and the JIFs today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the NJ KIC, we actually work with a lot. Again, we get all of our partners that we work with involved, signing up for the NJ KIC, that multi-state ISAC, if they're available to work with the MS ISAC. What ends up happening, and it really aligns back to that incident response planning on that flow chart. One of the first things to do is, do we need to alert law enforcement? If there is anything that would be criminal in nature on our systems, we definitely inform law enforcement. But we go ahead and if we have a potential ransomware attack, if we have funds transfers, like somebody's gotten into the payroll system and changed the routing number from the employee to someone else, that actually happens fairly often. Or they do a funds request that ends up being faulty or fraudulent. NJ KIC provides assistance to that, again, as a liaison through the FBI, but also the good news is they have a good view over their coverage area. So actually, sometimes they contact us and say, hey, we're seeing indications of something going on in your network that looks like it might be a threat actor. And we've been able to get it in front of some ransomware attacks because they showed up on our doorstep and said, hey, this looks like this might be this threat actor. Let's work together to get ahead of that. And we ended up getting ahead of the ransomware attack, and it was never even executed. So good news story there. The JIF, really, we have worked with less often. They're that kind of we filling out the questionnaires, doing the trust but verify, making sure that everyone is in the place that they should be. And then they're the break glass in case of emergency. So that tends to how we end up working with them. So
cool, thanks. And then one more here, and we're right at the 11:30, so we understand if some folks have to drop, but feel free to keep dropping a few more questions, and I think we'll have a couple minutes to go over. But we have one more. Saw you speak at Texpo last week, and you mentioned getting a BitSite security rating for our own domain and for the resource providers that we use. Is there any other site like that you would recommend? I use my scorecard, and I think that's partly the service that you were talking about, where we're able to help to review those third parties, right? Any other recommendations around monitoring them or trying to get that stuff done?
BitSite is my kind of weapon of choice for this, for sure. I'm not familiar with my scorecard. The big competitor to BitSite is Security Scorecard. So what I would do is check and see. If you can get anything for free from either of those providers. They might be able to give you just your scorecard, but if you want the actual scoring for the true vendor risk management, either one of those, they're gathering roughly the same information. BitSite gives you essentially a credit score between 300 and 850-ish, and then Security Scorecard is like on an 8F scale. So it's same information, just packaged a little differently.
Okay, cool. And that's part of what your team does on the third party management, is to help translate that prioritize, what you need to remediate, who you need to reach out to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We get a lot of value from bedside. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So I think that's all the questions that we had come in. So I think that's probably a good place to stop. Thanks so much, everybody, for spending the time with us here today and kind of walking through that presentation with us. Like I said, we'll share a recording of the session. We'll share a PDF of the slides. If if that would be helpful, just reach out, let us know. We can do that as well. We'll also share some contact information for the EDGE team. Michelle Ferraro and Aaron Brink are our two team members who really deal with helping our members get access to the resources that they need within EDGE. And so I'll put their emails in the chat here for you as we break. And then we'll also include them in the follow-up information that we send out too. And so, I think with that, we're good to wrap up here today. Like I said, thanks so much for spending some of your morning here with us. Thanks, Dawn, for the time. Always great chatting with you. And I think another great session under our belts. Hopefully we can help some of your towns, some of your districts with the cybersecurity challenges you're facing.
Thanks, everybody.